Hello everyone, and welcome. This is the sensory storytelling capturing space and sound for immersive extended reality experiences. We're very excited to have you all joining us virtually today. We have a great panel set up for you, and I hope you're all ready for some wonderful storytelling all about extended reality and creating a great sensory experience. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee indigenous people on who the ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. And I would also like to thank Syracuse University alum James Kuhn, which this event was made possible thanks to his generous support. Well, the panelists asked that if you don't already have a pair of headphones on, that you take this moment to get some because there will be a demonstration later in our discussion, and to get the full sensory experience, headphones will be preferred. All right, without further ado, I am excited and pleased to introduce to you our incredible panelists. Starting off, we have Veda Shastri, who is an independent, immersive journalist and filmmaker who works on the themes of gender, social justice, history, and trauma in her work. She has been a producer of immersive documentaries for National Geographic and a staff video journalist and producer for the New York Times, working with VR, AR, and interactive stories. Veda has produced over 100 virtual reality stories and short documentaries for the New York Times, from the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, inside a Black Hawk in Puerto Rico, to the lava fields of Iceland. For her work in the New York Times, she has won an Online Journalism Award and an Edward R. Murrow Award. Welcome, Veda.
Thanks.
Yeah, so great to have you. Heath Hanlin is also joining us, and he started working with virtual reality in 1996. His practice has been concerned with data utilization and combining multiple media with a special emphasis on 3D computer animation since the early 1990s. His animation, virtual realities, interactive media, music, and installations have been shown and performed in New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Prague, Tokyo, Kobe, and many, many more places. He served as chair for the Department of Transmedia at Syracuse University from 2008 to 2017, and he stepped down in 2017 to pursue research opportunities in the revived field of virtual reality.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Great to have you. And we have Dan Pacheco with us, who is the Peter A. Horvitz Chair of Journalism Innovation at the Newhouse School, and he teaches students how to use virtual reality for journalistic storytelling. In 2014, he pioneered the use of 360-degree video and CGI recreations for the USA Today's Harvest of Change, which earned an Edward R. Murrow Award. And he is currently working on an online news association Journalism 360 project that will use VR and AR to connect people in Syracuse with the African-American neighborhoods that were destroyed to create Interstate 81. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
And I will be your moderator today. I'm Renée Stevens. I'm an interactive and AR designer, educator, author, and speaker. And my creative work focuses on looking at innovative ways design can make reality more accessible and inclusive. I have run an interactive design studio for over a decade, and I'm the author of the book titled Designing Immersive 3D Experiences, which is a designer's guide to creating 3D experiences for extended reality. I have the privilege of teaching at the Newhouse School here at Syracuse University, as well as serving as the associate chair for the visual communications department. So thank you everyone for being here. And I know you're here to talk about great storytelling within this extended reality space. So to start things off, I'm gonna go right to our panelists. Can you each tell us a story of how you got involved in XR? Go for it, Dan.
Oh, okay. Well, for me, it kind of goes back to 2006 with this janky tool called Second Life which at the time I was working for a newspaper company, and my job was, as it is now, to just try new things. We recreated the city in that, and other companies like Reuters were doing things like that. And then Second Life didn't really live up to the hype and sort of went away, but I kind of took what I drew from that. I kind of remembered it, and it was when I met my a friend, Nadia de la Peña, in 2012, then at an Online News Association conference, and she told me about this thing that she was working on called Hunger in Los Angeles, and that I should put this other janky looking headset on my face. This is before Oculus came out. It was actually the prototype of the Oculus Rift. And I was really skeptical at first because last time I tried VR was in the 90s, and I remember how sick I got from it. And I basically tried to convince her I don't need to do this. And she grabbed me by the lapels and said, "You have to do this. This is going to really be a big thing for journalism." And when I went in there, I suddenly found myself in a food line, waiting for food, and a man in front of me then fell down and was diabetic, in a coma. A lot of people working in VR had this experience with that groundbreaking piece of journalism. And I came out of it completely changed, and I saw that this technology had the power to really solve a problem that journalists and all storytellers have, which is, as journalists, you have intimate access to places and people and situations that are often really difficult to describe. Through writing and even through video, it can be hard to really make people understand, but now we can actually take you there with us. And that's always been my interest in this technology, in particular in XR. So I wanted to take what I learned with help from Nani and then others, to create something with USA Today, which is Harvest of Change, which was about challenges farmers in the middle of the country were dealing with. And that got the Murrow Award. And I've been teaching these skills to journalists at the Newhouse School, as well as Syracuse University ever since.
Wonderful. Veda, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, I started working in this space in 2015, and that was kind of this time when my background is in journalism, and I'm a journalist as well, and that was when 360 video had kind of had suddenly become a little bit more accessible, and media organizations were starting to experiment with it, and I was working on a couple of projects, an international reporting trip. And I worked on one of the early 360 video VR documentaries. It ended up being producing it for PBS Frontline. It's called Return to Chernobyl, and filmed it on the ground in Pripyat and in Ukraine and in the exclusion zone in Chernobyl. And kind of like, really, it was like these very makeshift like GoPro rig, didn't even have any of the next gen accessible 360 degree cameras that came out the next year. And I was really struck by this like completely different paradigm of filming, directing, and the capacity it had for telling stories about spaces, and the resulting documentary, it really transports you to these spaces that have basically been inaccessible because of radiation for 30 years. And it was something where we were like, what's the new thing that we can do for viewers to kind of understand, what this space is like now. And it was really compelling when we started looking back at the footage. And it really hit me that I wanted to continue to work in that space. And so I got the opportunity to continue to do that. I joined, the New York Times was expanding a team, and getting into that space as well. And I joined this team that worked on the Daily 360, where we published a new 360 video every year for 1 year, and then continued on what's their immersive storytelling team. And so it was really challenged with going from 360, VR, and then AR, and then interactive storytelling as well. And then moved on to do projects with National Geographic and other organizations as well.
Wonderful. What a story. Yeah, that's great. Heath, you want to share yours?
I've been a university professor for a long time, so I tell long stories. So I will try to tell a short story. In the early 90s, I was finishing up my undergraduate in sculpture and experimental music. And I was already concerned with what I was calling sensory replacement. So I would try to put on these spectacles that would sort of replace people's senses with what I was trying to feed them, whether it was really loud noise music or big projections. But I was also doing real sculpture, and I had built this tower, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of the tower, but if you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it had a little bit to do with that. But anyway, I installed it out in the country in a spot that I thought was very remote, and it was this sort of machine that was designed to be struck by lightning. And as I drove away, I saw these giant television transmission towers that I had somehow missed. And I realized that I couldn't control space the way that I wanted to control space. So I started getting interested in 3D graphics as a way to create spaces that I could completely control, and then completely control the audience experience as well. And then that led to doing some VR/ML work and sound spatialization work in the late 90s into the early aughts. And then VR/ML was this sort of funky VR standard that was based initially on HTML and JavaScript, but it was a way to describe 3D space, a way you could do texture mapping. It was all procedural, but it worked fairly well. But the problem is that computers couldn't really run, particularly consumer computers couldn't run the kind of material that I was making. So I was restricted to media festivals and that kind of thing. And so I started doing pre-rendered graphics at that point. So really I'm doing animations, although they're kind of environmental animations. And then when Oculus hit, I sort of tried to transition from being a VR curmudgeon to a new VR practitioner. And so now I'm working on a large, complex project to create environmental models.
Wonderful. My story, kind of getting into extended reality, I could tell you the boring one or the fun one. So I'm presuming you all want the boring one. So I'm going to start with that, which was basically my background is in design. And I kind of see extended reality design or augmented reality design or, any of this. And we use extended reality, just to clarify, to kind of encompass virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality. And so I kind of got into that because my background in interaction design and motion design kind of merged in this happy space, which is now extended reality. So I almost see both of those mediums at, what I'm doing now is the advanced version of motion and UI UX design kind of coming all together. So that's the boring version. The more narrative version is I kind of came into the field almost by through my problem solving background. I was coming up with an idea for a concept, and I was trying to figure out the best medium to display information into a space. And instead of going with the traditional ways of, putting up a poster or putting up, different signage, I was like, I think it could be more immersive and more interactive. And so it just kind of led into a rabbit hole of researching what could possibly happen? How could this be improved? And then by just keep asking that question, I kind of fell into the world of augmented reality. And I haven't gotten out. So here I am still going. So my work, everything I kind of do comes from that design background and problem solving specifically. Throughout our conversation, we kind of get really excited about what we do, and we may be using terms that you may not understand. And so if there's something that you are like, I don't know what that means, please, there's the Q&A is open. And so if we're using terms and you would like some clarification, please drop that in. And we have people helping us monitor our questions. So if we see one that's very relevant, we'll make sure to answer that right away. If not, we will also be having a Q&A at the end. So if you think of something, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A whenever it comes to you. Great. All right. So we have a nice background of how we kind of all got into this. Kind of going a little deeper, what is sensory storytelling, right? This is what we're all talking about today, is this idea of telling a narrative, telling a story through the senses. And what does that mean specifically to you and your work? Anybody want to take that one?
I can dive into that one.
Great.
So you want us to just get into the sensory part of it. So I think what's really interesting to me in terms of VR is really trying to create environments that convince people that they are in a different place, or even in a different body. And in order to do that, I think you need some really, really highly detailed spaces. You really need to understand how humans hear. And VR tools are getting to the point now where we can simulate a lot of these things. But there's also a lot of little tricks that you can do. So this is like a little tip for people who are getting interested in VR. There's a lot of ways that you can make people feel something like heat or something like cold, right? So if you put a red light close to their eye, they're going to feel that, they're going to experience that as heat, right? If you give them a lot of blues, they're going to experience that as a cooler temperature, right? If you give them rainfall, they know what that feels like with their bodies. And so in a way, it's sort of like just trying to move people a little bit beyond what their physical experience is, but always trying to understand what their physical experience is before you try to move them, if that makes sense. But I think that the details of it really are the most important thing, which is part of why I kind of quit in the early aughts, right? Because I couldn't get the level of detail that I wanted with real-time graphics. But what's amazing right now with the NVIDIA hardware that's out there, you can really do a lot of really convincing lighting and texturing, movement, and really give people a sense of embodiment and a sense of place, right? And if you can give somebody a sense of place, then you can tell them a story. But I think the first thing you have to do is give them that sense of place, and then the story can come out of that, and they'll feel the story instead of just hearing it or seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Dan. Thanks.
Actually, Heath explained a lot of the same things I was going to get into, so I won't repeat them. But I think what it really comes down to is, we're three-dimensional creatures, right? We live in space, and most of our media up until now has been on these flat rectangles. And we're now at the point where, just as Heath was saying, he gave up early. I did too, because we yearn to kind of, our media has been really wanting to kind of move into our natural state, which is space, and then you add the senses on top of that, and that sense of being there with journalism and documentary film in particular is just really powerful. And a lot of it that really comes down to how you feel. We don't talk about this much in media, but with in traditional media, but with the sensory XR type of media, we often start with that. Like, how is the experiencer going to feel? We don't even say the term story as often. It's like all the verbs change and the nouns. There's really, so in the kind of work that I and I think a lot of us do, there's kind of 4 tools. So here's a little bit of, for the lexicon. 3D modeling is kind of artistically created or recreated objects and spaces. And so you can do a lot with that, but sometimes it gets to feel sort of cartoony and breaks the sense of embodiment that Heath was talking about. So one technology that I'll demonstrate later that I'm really excited about, and it's getting really popular now, is photogrammetry. So photogrammetry is a process that basically takes thousands of pictures that are taken from different angles of anything or any space and turns it into something like a 3-dimensional holographic representation that you can literally walk through in VR or project into your space on your phone in augmented reality. And that's really powerful. And basically the sensors that are in a lot of these devices, whether it's a phone or a headset or glasses, the most important thing they do is they track your movement through space in different ways. And then the visuals match up with that. And that gives you that sense of being there. And it really is like 3D transportation. So there's also 360 video, which I'm going to actually let Veda kind of talk more about that, because she's created so many of them. But that's becoming a lot more easy to produce. And then an area that I'm really excited about lately is social VR. So there are some currently freely available services. One is Mozilla Hubs that is run by the Mozilla Foundation. And you can take this 3D content, share it, upload it, send the link to somebody, and then as long as they have headsets, you're actually standing around that object or in that space that you maybe 3D scanned, and the storytelling then becomes a true social experience. And I find that really exciting. So all of that is, like, it wasn't possible to do any of that even 2 years ago. So I feel like we have all these new superpowers and we're just starting to figure out, okay, how can we use them to convey information and empathy?
Yeah, I just, I definitely echo what Dan and Heath have said. And I just, in addition, coming to this as a journalist and trying to create, documentaries, I think the capacity, and I think the goal for me is really to kind of be able to create as real of a virtual reality experience or in an XR kind of an experience. And I think that's what's really exciting about the last few years, even though, we keep moving from one to the other and starting and stopping and then reassessing a lot. But these tools of these new 360-degree cameras, photogrammetry, the level of interactivity that we can, start to see, combined with something that's not just seems like an old school CGI kind of environment, but something where you can actually feel like, okay, this is that exact, site, or this is, you're going into the field and actually seeing, the context of these characters or people that are interviewed, the way you would in to some degree see it in a 2D documentary, but at a completely different level. So the capacity that this gives for people to the audience to understand the context, and that's where I think, this detailing and that the importance of this detailing comes in, and that the technology needs to be able to do that. And then it's very effective, whether it's visual, a walk around experience where you can what's called a volumetric experience, where you can interact or walk, go, it's not just a 360 video, but as you walk, the experience in the space has a parallax and changes as well, and spatial audio, which we're going to get into as well. And so getting you into much more into mimicking these real life experiences that we all have and bringing them into storytelling. I think that's really the goal. And what sometimes capturing it can be challenging. Once capturing it is becoming easier, then distributing it is challenging. So and we can keep talking about that, but I think for me that's really in my work what excites me about this.
Awesome. Veda, if you're up for it, there was a question that came in that is quite relevant, I think, to what you're talking about now, about 360 video. And the question was, it's been a few years since it came out. And so they're wondering, didn't see like that it didn't proliferate as much as they thought it might in the past. So especially on the marketing side. So they were just wondering if you have any insights on that, specifically on 360 video, and maybe the future of what that could be.
Right. I think, each time something, with new technology comes out, there's like a little bit of like a, more of like a drama and like a lot of attention, media attention on it. And then it sort of becomes normalized. And then the next thing comes up and then you start to hear more about it. And, now we're starting to hear a lot more about AR as well. I think it's absolutely true that it's not like 360 video came in and now it's like everywhere that we see it. However, I think, with each, so I'm going to address one of the, that in a second, but I think, what's important, and I've seen it in my work, is that basically each of these points that we reached was really important in developing the next level. So the work that we do, we are actually building on still doing some form of 360 video, or next level. The cameras have improved, people are continuing to do that kind of video work, or taking it into a more interactive kind of space as well. So especially even at Sundance, some of the projects in the new frontier, they're very, very like advanced, looking at very cutting edge you know, stories that have progressed so much in the from the last few years, where it would have maybe 5 years ago just been a simple 360 video. So they've actually built on that. And even, but I think the problem is the distribution. So, you know, with 360 video, it was like, you know, you ideally want to be able to see it in a headset. Who has a headset? That hasn't really taken off. Like the wearable kind of technology hasn't really, you know, become as accessible. That hasn't really taken off as much as, you know, people may perhaps wanted. It's only like, just to see it on your phone is not really like the best version, or web VR isn't the best version to be able to access it. So I think, you know, that's really the challenge. The work I think is being done. How people are going to be able to see it is, you know, the question. And there is a lot of progress being done in that as well. The headsets have gotten a lot better as well. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years, where we're at, because I think that switch is just going to happen kind of the way we had it with like mobile smartphones. And then suddenly it's going to be a lot easier to access this content.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anybody else want to weigh in on that before I moved on?
I think I just say a little bit something about that. The you know, novelty is like a huge asset if you're doing new media, and it's also a huge enemy, right? Because things are fresh and they're new, and everybody assumes that this novel thing is going to change the world, and then it doesn't, and then you have to figure out how to actually work with it. And so I think we're in this really interesting stage of VR and AR development where we're kind of past this first flush of novelty, right? Which is, it's a bit of a quieter time to be working, but I think it's also possible now to do significant work that really hasn't been possible in the past, because we're not completely leveraging novelty here, right? We're leveraging things that are a little more familiar. So it's maybe a little less sparkly, but I hope a little more significant too.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And I think exactly what you both have just said. There's every little step along the way is building upon the back of the step prior. So every little advancement is making impact, whether or not we see it or not. And I love watching all of the, you know, all the tech companies. It's like you have all these smaller companies doing all these amazing things, and then you watch who buys those, and then you can see how these like different formations of industries are forming, and that literally changes every single day. So it's definitely an exciting field, an exciting industry that you don't get bored on ever, because don't blink, because it will change. All right. Yes. All right. So how do you see different media using extended reality? That was our next question. Dan, did you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. And I was just going to say 360 video now, because the cameras are so inexpensive and plentiful and easy to use, it's actually fairly commonplace in newsrooms and journalism. And where it's showing up mostly is through their Facebook accounts, right? And I think that we shouldn't be, you know, feel like, oh, that's a failure. You know, actually, it's just you know, just common, right? And so we're at the point where we can say, well, okay, what's the best technology to tell this story, right? And it doesn't have to be, you know, like back when Veda was working New York Times, it's like, okay, let's, you know, spit out another 360. I mean, that must have gotten a little, it's like a little harrowing at times, right?
I didn't sleep for a year.
We don't have to do that anymore, right? And it's like, okay, which tool is best? Which XR tool is best for this kind of story? So where I'm seeing that, you know, the bar has really moved within journalism, and I actually saw a really great piece like this also in documentary storytelling with Sundance, is stories that take place on your desktop or your table through augmented reality. And in the journalism space, one example, something I really, I just tried today actually, is in USA Today, they have a category there for augmented reality. If you scroll way down, and I don't know why you always have to scroll way down for the new cool stuff, just saying. But if you do it, they have a really amazing animation in augmented reality where you see how COVID affects the body, right? So when you push the button, then on your tabletop through your phone, you then see this human body, and then you see the virus, molecules kind of moving towards it, and then they go into the lungs, and then it kind of zooms in. And I mean, that's a spatial narrative. That's actually another term that Nani coined, and I think it's perfect example or perfect description of what that is. That, oh, okay, we've all been hearing about this and reading about it, right? And trying to imagine, okay, what's going on, when you someone gets COVID, and why does, how does it affect the lungs and everything? And it's like, once you see that, it's like, okay, your mind's eye understands it better. And that's where I think these technologies are great, right? And then in other areas, like the New York Times had a really fun tour of Chinatown, where they actually used photogrammetry to completely scan this one block of Chinatown. And as you then kind of scroll through that story, you see photos of what Chinatown used to look like back in the 20s and 30s superimposed. And so you're kind of time traveling, and that takes place completely in a browser, right? So no headset needed for that. But if somebody did want to try in a headset, and there was enough of a market for that, then it would be easy for them to take those assets and then make them available that way. So I kind of see it all being in this continuum. And what the best tool for the story you're trying to tell is really where you have to start with. Not how do we cram, these 360 cameras we got into every single thing we can. That's often how innovation starts when it takes off in a company, and it should never stay there, right? Because that's not what we should be doing.
Veda or Heath, did you want to add in different places or great use cases for XR that you've seen in different media?
Sure. I can actually share some recent work. One of the projects I was involved in at Nat Geo, and then one project in the New York Times. I did really love the Chinatown project as well. I send it to everybody these days because I really love archival work as well. So I'm just going to try and share this. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. It may take me a second to pull up the video. Can you see my video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is just a trailer. That was a project that I was involved in when I was working on a team at National Geographic, which is they had a partnership with Oculus, and they were developing some VR games for Oculus Quest. And so there are two highlighted in that, two levels. One is Antarctica, which is like a CGI environment where the person participating is exploring, and they're like a National Geographic explorer. But the second one is photogrammetry of Machu Picchu. It uses actual photogrammetry of the site, and you're exploring it, and you're this photographer, and you have this guide, and you learn about the site as you go through it. And it's, there's a lot of like sensitivity about the space, and you're kind of documenting it as well as you get to explore it. And that was very exciting because it was this level of being able to really document this like culturally fragile and important site, and be able to bring it to people who cannot visit it. But at the same time, it also gives you a whole other level of interactivity, which is very, very cool. So that came out in 2019, about a year ago. And I'm just going to show you one more example from the Times that came out just a few months ago, very pandemic related, which is an augmented reality experience. Yes. So what you're seeing is a model of how masks will prevent particles. And so they've clearly, and you keep exploring how, like, if one particle comes out of your mouth or your nose, how it's going to trap it. And so this is something that you can kind of, they have a web kind of experience. So it's something that it can be purely either you can just see this on your phone. You don't even have to do this AR thing of bringing it into your space. You can just go through the article or read the text, get the data, and explore it. And then they also have an option of, tap this QR code and go into the AR experience and take a look, and masks work. This is how we're going to prove it to you. It's obviously a model, and I think it's very, very well done, and you can keep kind of exploring it. It's something where you don't necessarily, I think it's interesting because it's an example where you don't necessarily need to see the model in your space. Like, it doesn't really have anything in particular to do with the context of your room, but bringing like a mask in and you being able to walk around it or come close to it and really examine for yourself. It's this very good use case of explanatory journalism, which I think we're starting to see a lot with AR and this interactive kind of form. It's a great, like, VR and 360 is even like the Machu Picchu example. It's a great use case for even like documentary style journalism, but it can also be very well used for explanatory journalism as well.
Great.
If I could just add, it's also fun. Your Machu Picchu piece, super fun. It's a game that you then and you're in it, so you're fictionalized, but and you have all the models, but then it's a really fun game and you learn, and I think by engaging in a fun way, people really pick up concepts much more quickly. And I think the mask in its own way is fun, right? I mean, there's nothing fun about reading about COVID, right? But they actually managed to make that like engaging and interesting and sort of fun. It's like, okay, where are the little molecules? Yeah.
And it really makes a difference to have the model, like, seeing it on your website, you're like, yeah, okay. But having it in your room, you can like kind of walk towards it. You can see like, where these particles are, and it literally is asking you like tap, see, like, okay, if it moves here, it traps it here. If it moves, it comes out of here, it traps it there. So it's something that's going to resonate and stay with you in a different way, I think, as well. And that, I think, speaks to the, that visceral kind of experience that people find that there's a lot more user recall, both in terms of like what they talk about with empathy or even remembering what characters said, their names, or the information that's conveyed. When you were like physically involved in it, hearing it or moving around with it, you're gonna have much more memory of that as well.
For that Machu Picchu experience, can you explain a little bit about the team and then how was that distributed?
Yeah, sure. So it was a partnership between National Geographic and Oculus. So there was a story development editorial team at Nat Geo, And then there were the game designers, force field. So that was a whole other team. And then there was Oculus as well. And it was specifically for this Oculus Quest. So it's something that you're going to be able to play. It's something that you like purchase as a game with a head and play it with a headset. And so the game designers, like that was a lot of heavy work, and they had their own team of, I think, 3 to 5 people plus, probably a lot of others doing a lot of the detailing. Once they were like working with the photogrammetry. On the editorial side, there were 3 of us, and we would kind of just look at the scripts and we would test the user experience, and also kind of think about the mission of like, what are we trying to get out of it, and what is sensitive, as well. So that's how that worked.
Great. We have a great question, which I think will go nicely into Heath or Dan's, if you wanted to share some of your work as well. But the question is that they're interested in how immersive media can incorporate the audience's surroundings. So beyond just putting the visuals on a tabletop or virtually exploring, a specific place, how can you see a site-specific immersive media bringing in more of the senses? So I don't know if either one of you wanted to.
I've got an answer. I was in New Zealand in fall of 2019 for a speaking engagement, and visited the Weta Workshop game studio. And at the time, they had Magic Leap had embedded a team there, and they were working on their first game product, which was really interesting. And I don't think I have a super clean answer to the question, because the problem with our common spaces is that they are our common spaces. I think the mask tutorial works fairly well in a common space, right? Because it brings it home. But other things might not, right? Their game was really only dependent on having a blank wall, which I guess it incorporates your space, but is it a meaningful incorporation? I'm not sure. But anyway, we started developing a project that got COVIDed, like so many other projects, but it's shelved. So hopefully we'll be able to revisit it. Wellington is on the North Island of New Zealand, and it's got almost 360 ocean view. So it's a really incredible space. If you climb to the highest mountain in the city of Wellington, you have this incredible view. And the city actually commissioned a LiDAR scan, which is a light radar, which can do really exact the data is pretty sloppy, but you can work with it and then develop 3D models based on it. And so Magic Leap and I were going to do a project where we brought large groups of people up to the top of the mountain, supplied them all with Magic Leap hardware, and then they could look out and see how sea level rise would change based on different kinds of parameters, which is pretty similar to the project that I'm working on right now. Now this is a special space, right? So Michael's question isn't quite fully answered by that, and it's a special event. Right, and this is the problem, right? Is that the only reason we could do this is because Magic Leap was willing to cough up a whole lot of headsets to make this happen, and that becomes really, really difficult if you're operating on any kind of shoestring or small budget.
Yeah, and with Sundance, there's so many examples of like that. So I saw somebody mention that it's really hard to even now with it being online to make sure that people can see your work. Can I show a little bit of my work? Because I think it addresses some of this. So I'm just going to share this real quick. So this is a project, sort of a sneak peek into something that I'm working on with some students with actually an ONA funded grant called Journalism 360. And we're capturing spaces that exist in a way that allows people to then experience them in their own spaces in their living room. So what we're seeing here is a living room that is an artist studio, and using photogrammetry, and you'll see in a second here kind of how that works. My research assistant, Sunny Kirasuolo, basically took about, I think, 1,500 pictures, and those triangles represent all the different places where the photo was taken and the angle at which it was taken. And the software reality capture then in about 30 minutes or so can then create a full 3D model. And what gets exciting is once you have that, you can then upload that to a number of different sites. One of them is Sketchfab, and just right on your browser, you'll see in a second here, you can then kind of move through it. So you just have to have a computer. So go to a standard web browser, and you'll see that you can then move through this space, and the detail is like pretty good. You can tell that it's been captured. It's a little melty. That's the technical term we use, not really technical. But you can go all the way around the entire space like that. And if you then take that same exact link and open in an Oculus Quest, because there's a browser in the Oculus Quest. So here I am in the Quest. I then point at the Sketchfab model. Then as soon as I hit that button, I'm walking through that other space in my current room. And so at the Quest, you basically, they have this great workflow where you map out your safe space so you won't run into chairs and tables and things. And then it's crazy. You can then transport to another space in your space. So I feel like this is really powerful as more headsets like that come about that are also really inexpensive. I saw that some of the people in the chat were saying they have a Quest. What can I do in a Quest? You don't even need to find apps anymore that you download and pay for. You can just go to a site like Sketchfab, find 3D models people have scanned and start walking through them. So the time in COVID when we can't travel, what a great thing, right? I'll also say that the Google Earth app is pretty fun for that as well. With the head, you need a headset to do this, to have it be full body immersive. But then if you take that same model in a Safari browser right now on an iPhone, a pretty new iPhone, then you can tap a button if they've enabled it, that model this way, so that you can then project that into your space. And this here is a statue from that artist studio. Sunny also went ahead and 3D imaged that using photogrammetry. And then you basically push that download button. And this is actually in my own living room. I'm then looking at that model. We're going to be seeing a lot more of this kind of content show up across the internet. Google just recently started introducing 3D models into their mobile browser. So when you search, you might see a little invitation to look at this object that you brought up in search in your room, in your space. And that's also pretty powerful. There's actually one last thing I just want to mention here. There's a project we're working on around the Interstate 81 and the history of it. This interstate was built largely by destroying and the neighborhoods from an African-American community, relocating all those people. And we're going to be using 3D models and photogrammetry and then historical photos of those neighborhoods to then connect people with the past. So what you're seeing here is a collaboration with our architecture school. They're basically modeling all of downtown Syracuse, and then this interstate is actually going to be the highway, the overpass is going to be coming down. And so our goal is to connect people with the past, including all, warts and all the bad parts of it, and then the present, so they can see, where there once was a beauty parlor for African-American women, now it's a really ugly intersection. And then the future of what they're calling the community grid, the architect students are then looking through documents and recreating that using 3D modeling. And so all of that happens in space, right? So our whole idea with this was that, people are driving across that highway all the time, even if they don't live in Syracuse. It's going to be coming down. Here's an opportunity through augmented reality and virtual reality to connect people with the past and help them envision maybe a more equitable future, right? Where we don't have to relocate people again. And that's, so I think it all kind of comes together around, when you just think about where somebody is, then an immersive story can happen anywhere now. And I think that's really exciting. And even a couple years ago, it wasn't like that. You had to have an expensive Windows PC made for gamers and $1,000, headset system and all these sensors, and all that's going away. You just do it on your phone. And if you have a headset that costs $200, that's all in one, you can then kind of enter it.
Yes, beautiful. The capturing of the space, just how much that has transformed in the past even months,
3
is pretty
months.
spectacular. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. For me personally, what I love about extended reality is how the ability, obviously the first sense we think of is visual, right? So it makes sense that that's literally makes sense, that that's the first thing you think of is that visual experience. But you've talked about the visceral qualities behind extended reality, and to me the most exciting part is where all these different senses come together, and we have these multi-modalities that work in like beautiful harmony, that really replicate realism in the world, in our physical spaces. And then you can either bring those into our digital spaces, and enhance them, or replicate them in an interesting way. Heath, do you want to talk a little bit about how audio plays into your work?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm working with a team right now called Kairos, and we don't know yet if we're a research group or a cult or a company. We're currently trying to figure that out. We have aspects of all three. We're working on a project called 1 Square Mile. That's the larger project, and the idea of the project is that we do exhaustive multidisciplinary surveys of 1 square mile of ground, and we're going to try to do a dozen of these. As sort of the starter pack, right? So the first one that we had scheduled before COVID hit, and this work is very much like film set work. It's very much like survey work, right? So people have to live together. They have to be in close proximity to one another. So we've delayed, but the first piece is going to be taking place in Long Beach, California, around this area called the Peninsula, which is an area that has a lot of importance to the Tonga tribe, and to the city of Los Angeles, right? So it's a place of a lot of cultural friction, a lot of cultural exchange, and a place where they're currently bulldozing giant dams of sand every day to keep the ocean at bay. It's quite graphic. So anyway, we were going to work with that, and we have botanists and climate scientists, artists, musicians, and a really large multidisciplinary team to really try to capture everything going on in space. So we put that off, obviously. So right now we're working on a project called the Artifact, which takes about a square acre, smaller space that is in the woods directly adjacent to my house, right? So we have an acreage off the house, and so we're studying that and starting to stand it up. One of the most important things, right, is to capture the sound of the space. And so I did prepare a short example for you all. So this would be a good time to put on your headphones. Although wait for just a second, because I'm going to talk just a little bit longer before I start playing it. We can't play this sound via Zoom because Zoom is in mono, and we need stereo. So there's going to be a SoundCloud example, which I'm going to point you to, and then you'll be able to listen to that. But I'm using ambisonic recording, which is a sound field recording technique, which what it means is that it captures the space from 4 different angles, essentially. And then we can use software to simulate the way that human hearing would interpret that space and the way that a human being would interpret their own position in that space relative to the sound that's going on. The way you do that is with something that's called binaural mixing. So what binaural mixing does is it allows you to pinpoint where somebody is in space, and it simulates much more how we hear than stereo. Stereo is how we listen to music. It's how you listen to almost anything in headphones. But the cool thing about binaural mixing is that you can hear a binaural sound with a standard pair of stereo headphones, which I'm assuming most of you have. I know most of the panelists right now are wearing headphones. I'm not, because I have speakers in here. But anyways, so what we can't do, unless you've had the COVID shot and have a Bill Gates microchip implanted in your brain, we can't track your head just with your headphones. Now, if you have had the shot, we can track that, and we're actually tracking it right now, which might creep you out, but that's just how modern life works, right? But anyway, what this can't do is simulate how you actually orient yourself in space. So the way you actually orient yourself in space is with tiny movements of the head, right? You're not aware of them, but they're how you position yourself. And so when you're listening to this example, you'll just need to stay still, or it'll sort of break the space illusion. But if you were wearing a VR headset, we can track where your head is, and we format the audio so that it works with that. So it works very much the same way that you orient yourself in space. So anyway, in this example, there's a flock of geese flying overhead. They're going to be coming out of about your 10 o'clock, and they're going to exit at about your 4 o'clock. The sample's about 1 minute long. And I'm going to drop it right here into the chat so that you can all grab it. And then just for the sake of propriety, I'm going to share screen and show you the screen so that you'll know that you're looking at the right thing. But don't listen to it on Zoom, because it'll just be mono and all the spatial information will be erased if you listen to it in mono. Unless you've got the microchip, in which case mono will work 100% fine for you. Where is this? There it is. Okay. So I'm not going to play this. I'm just going to go silent now for a minute, let you listen to it. It's so hard to be silent. It's really hard to be silent. So hard to be silent. All right, I'll go back to this now. So please feel free to ask any questions about that that you have, but it's a really fantastic way to keep people grounded in the space. I've actually come to think that it's, in some ways, it's almost more important than the visuals, right? Because so many of the spatial cues that we take, and so many of the ways that we embody ourselves in space are from what we're hearing. And so
I experienced the geese early today, Heath, and I think that if you could send over some more animal sounds and nature sounds, good meditative technique.
Right on.
I really enjoyed it.
Cool.
Absolutely. And yes, the layering of the sound and how it reacts to the person and the positioning of the head takes the whole experience to another level for sure. So
and it's
yeah,
a fascinating, I mean, it's a really, the mix down stage is as much of a hassle as it is working with any medium. But this sample was actually recorded with a single mic at a single time. The actual soundtrack for the artifact project that I'm working on is going to be more complicated than that. It's more analogous to a film soundtrack, right? In that we need a lot of different elements from a lot of different places. But in this sample, this is just a single 4-capsule mic, you know, compressed a little bit and equalized a little bit, but largely left as dry as possible.
Absolutely. Any other senses that you guys wanted to specifically speak to and how you incorporate that into your works, or that you've seen used successfully?
So I want to bring one up. This is from a Sundance project, actually, New Frontiers, from a couple years ago, called Tree. And it's still one of the best examples of like really kind of lo-fi ability to bring senses into a story. And Tree basically embodied you in a tree, which that alone was just crazy, that after about 15 minutes, you felt like a tree and you didn't want to leave. I thought that was like incredible. But the tree ends up, and this is, you know, spoiler alert, you experience deforesting and you get burned. And so when you're being burned, you see all the, you sort of like your arms are branches and they're sort of flailing around. But then the people who run Tree, they just come over with a match. They, you know, put the match out and put it under your nose without you knowing. And so you smell that, and it is really powerful. So you don't need to necessarily use high tech to engage the senses when you're able to be right there, you know, in that kind of situation. But they also used some, I think they said it was like these $35 things they got from switches they got from Home Depot that they then connected to the computer, and with Unity, they could then trigger them to basically turn things on and off. And one of them is a fan. So when you hear wind and you see the wind blowing, then you feel the wind. And it was really low tech, but incredibly effective. So I think there are a lot of ways to engage senses like that. And, you know, I'd say anybody who's experimenting with this, you know, be creative, but don't assume that it requires you to do a lot of, you know, coding and stuff like that. You could just be the match effect.
I saw a piece at New Frontiers back in, I think it's 2015, I remember this because Facebook just showed me a photo of me being in it, 6 years ago now, I guess. And
Very meta.
I think you're a bird, and they had this really elaborate contraption which would blow
Birdly,
air
yes.
on you. Did you see that? It was
I
amazing.
did that too.
And so
Yeah.
it would blow all this air on you, and you're like flying over the Alps, and it's really extraordinary. Like visually, the piece was sort of Google Map level, but the addition of the wind and they were able to calculate how the machine was oriented based on what you were seeing. So it made a big difference in terms of its overall level of immersion. Of course, this is not going to go into anybody's home, so this is still this still has a lot of privilege problems, right? Like you can do all these things, but there's only 5 people who can see it, which is that's a real problematic.
At Tribeca, I've experienced like wearing I think more high tech, higher end kind of haptic body experience. And I think if I remember correctly, the project, it was about, I think, water, and it was like giving you this kind of vibrations of like being on a boat or animal kind of attack. I don't remember exactly what the storytelling was, but it was some water oriented thing, and it was like you're journeying and you're getting that sense of like being bumped around and the motion of the water and stuff. So it's very, very effective if it can be used, but again, it's something for a live festival kind of environment.
Absolutely. From the design perspective, the user experience is always what is such an important part of the AR or VR experience. And so the sense that we haven't really talked about would be the sense of an awareness of a position of our body and the movement from within. So the proprioception, and then that concept of like almost knowing where your hands are, even if you can't see your hands. So if you're wearing a headset, knowing that if you reach your arm out, that you're pointing it in the direction that you understand. And so it just brings it to a whole nother level of feeling and sense. So obviously we have our sound and our smells and our touch, and the haptic feedback is so important, especially for the user to understand, to get feedback in some way, especially if people aren't used to experiencing their senses in the way that they are. But then, again, that sense from within the body and having an understanding of how all of our body and our movements and our gestures can also influence the overall experience. So yes, it becomes a full body experience. Even if you're feeling like it may be using your eyes as the most prominent, there's definitely a lot more going on. And if you feel like you're only using the eyes, then you really have to pay attention to your experience even more, because that may be the part you're most aware of. But by paying attention, like you'll realize that it really is connecting a whole lot more than just one sense at any given point, especially if done well.
And what's amazing about that is that now with XR, the body is a medium. I mean, this is like, that's when you experience this and really get into it, you realize, okay, this is a totally new, leap forward. And our bodies are like the movie theater now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds weird, but when you try it, you'll understand.
Yes. Yes, your body becomes the medium. The world becomes the new interface, and your body becomes the medium. We have some really great questions in the Q&A that I definitely want to get to, but one last question before we get there. In terms of ethics in XR, some of you are coming from a background of journalism. Some of us are coming from, more of an art background, or more of a, just different fiction versus nonfiction storytelling. And so what are some of the boundaries that maybe you've experienced, or some suggestions for those who are getting into the field? How far can you go in terms of recreating this so-called real world? And what kind of questions have you had to internally ask yourself, or maybe have been asked by others?
I mean, I think I'm coming at this from the art point of view, not from a journalistic point of view. So my standpoint's a little bit different, but I think that the decision making is very similar to adapting a book to film, or a short story to film, right? So in the project that I'm working on, I'm obviously fictionalizing, right? I don't have the resources to create every single tree in this forest. I don't have the resources to get the ground covering precisely the way it is. And so I think it's a matter of figuring out how much you really need, right? What people will accept as reality. And I'm not using photogrammetry for this project. I'm using a really traditional workflow where we're taking thousands of photographs, and then I have pre-production artists who are doing drawings and paintings of various perspectives and the way that light works in the space. And then I've got a 3D environment team that are building out the environment based on what I'm providing to them and what the pre-production team is providing to them. And so in this way, we're working the same way that you work on a large VFX shot, or the same way that you work to make a contemporary, large scale video game. And so to me, like, it's all about the point, right? The point of my project is to try to get people to accept more stewardship for the areas in which that they live, right? And not just the big, the incredible, beautiful areas that they might visit once or might visit 4 times, but the areas that are right there, that are right at their house or right in their city, right? Or right at their coastline. This is a really important aspect of it, right? And climate justice is also a really important aspect of this project. And so I'm pretty willing to fictionalize, but I'm trying to be quite upfront about where we fictionalize and where we don't fictionalize. And I think that that's, from the ethics question, the important thing is disclosure, right? So like, I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody, but I obviously have to fictionalize.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is disclosing your methods, especially in journalism. And just as a side note, in the virtual reality storytelling class I've been teaching for many years now, I have journalism students, and then I have like television, radio, film students. And I always tell the TRF students, it's like, your job's a little easier because you can make stuff up. Like journalists, okay, it has to be real, right? And the real challenge there is we saw this first with 360 video. I'm sure that, I know that Veda actually talks about this sometimes too, where we thought, well, is it ethical to take the camera out or the tripod? And there was a big discussion about that. And I think everyone kind of came to the point of, it's like, oh, that's okay, as long as you tell people what you did and you're replacing it with real material. But when you get into photogrammetry, I'm already seeing it's a can of worms, because there are certain things that the software simply cannot recreate if it's highly reflective. You'll have holes. And so you need to go in and basically fill in the holes. And that's where art then kind of meets reality. And I think it's, we're talking about this with the work we're doing for the I-81 project, because, I'm starting to wonder, okay, should we, start making screen recordings for sort of a making of documentary to show, here's what we did, so we can disclose it and say, it's like, we know that we had to fill holes in, here's the process we went through, because there's the real danger that people won't trust what you're showing them when they start then seeing deep fake versions of photogrammetry, right? Or this is a horrible term that I heard at a conference at Yale. Somebody got up there and said, if you're concerned about deep fake videos, get ready for deep fake experiences, which is essentially recreated animations, and then people are in them, and that'll happen at some point. So I think that the public's ability to trust us as journalists and documentary filmmakers, it's going to be tested even more, because when people start seeing true just absolute violations that are in full 3D using videogrammetry, which is basically video photogrammetry, will they believe anything, right? I mean, this is something we need to all as an industry think about. So I don't know, what are your thoughts, Veda? You have an answer to that? Solution?
I think, of course, I think transparency is really important. And I think that, you have that code of trust, and when it should be really clear, when something, if the audience isn't, or the viewer isn't clear about something, then it should be made clear to them at that juncture, what's been done. But I just want to say that, I think it's interesting what Heath said, like from the arts perspective, but I kind of have actually used that same philosophy with journalistic practice, which is that you're really seeing them as emerging technology as reporting tools, and really seeing them as an extension of, you know, the production processes, having an extension of the same ethics I would use if I was making regular video, or reporting you know, a textual story. And so when we're in the field, it's the same process of explaining, like, you know, this is the camera, what I'm going to be doing, getting your characters comfortable with the camera, like, and in some ways, I actually have found that in terms of, you know, for verite kind of filming, the 360 camera is sometimes better than having somebody like in the room all the time, you know, trying to get a close-up shot and being like, yeah, just keep eating your dinner, like pretend I'm not here. But you actually can leave the camera in the space and people get used to it, and you're not there. You know, and you kind of keep recording like that. And so there's actually, you know, there's a silver lining to it as well. Of course, it gets more complicated, as Dan is saying, with photogrammetry as well. But I think thinking about these things as the same, I think these decisions are made with photo and video as well. You know, it's like, how much can, you know, do people airbrush or, you know, Photoshop documentary photos or, you know, photographs for magazines and news organizations. And then again, of course, you know, to also echo what Heath was saying, that thinking about what is the mission, right? What's the purpose? And for different, you know, I've worked for different media companies, their mission and their style is different. And so the Times is, you know, was much more news oriented, investigative reporting, that kind of focus. National Geographic has a mission where it's very clear that, you know, one of their elements is to, you know, conserve the planet and get people to care about that. So there's a little bit of space in the storytelling for that, where, you know, we can kind of talk about Machu Picchu or do a VR experience along that theme of conservation, which may not be whereas I might be covering a protest for the Times instead. So it also completely varies depending on what the purpose of the project is.
The inobtrusive 360 camera can be an incredible storytelling tool. One of my graduate students last year did a project called Dinner, where she embedded a 360 camera in at dinner time for 8 families who had recently immigrated to the US. And they had a lot of, you know, they were of varying different sizes, vastly different economic resources, right? And vastly different numbers of people gathered in the space. But the thing that really held it together was the ways in which they were having to adapt their food ways to deal with being in the US. And it was absolutely fascinating. And she really didn't touch it beyond editing it together. And it was really an incredibly beautiful portrait of these families, but also a really empathy-inducing portrait of these families, just in terms of how much you have to change to restart your life, right? And it was really, really a beautiful piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, the empathy that can, you know, come through some of these experiences is incredible and moving. And yeah, it just has that entire emotional connection to it as well. Okay, wonderful. We have some really great questions in the Q&A, and I'll start off with a great one about education. So how do you see these technologies being incorporated into educational programs and teaching techniques, both in residential and in remote modalities?
So I love that question. And I really basically was forced into that very question when our classes all went online. I think probably Heath can relate to that. Back in the spring, I had a virtual reality class. Students were creating things, and then suddenly they were all online and had no headsets, and we had to completely pivot. And we did some more in that space in the fall. And basically, what I ended up doing, and I'm curious to hear, Heath, what you did is, I just at the right time, there were all of these really exciting, purely web-based platforms. One of them is Mozilla Hubs. That if you go to hubs.mozilla.com, you can try it for free, and you can basically set up a room or even create your own virtual reality rooms. And then whether if someone might have, one person might have just a computer with a web browser, another might have a VR headset, another has a tablet, they can all engage with their avatars in one space. And so when, in this time when we've lost so much physical connectivity in classrooms, I found that to be that, the students really enjoyed it. And we started kind of figuring out what we could do there. And it's, there's another platform called Spatial that is doing that specifically for education and kind of corporate training. And that's also free. So there are a lot of tools that I think COVID has kind of brought to the forefront that are really exciting. And then when it comes to, if you want to get engaged in photogrammetry with students in a class, there are actually a number of apps out there. If you just go to your app store, type in 3D scanning, you'll see a bunch of them come up. And if you have an iPhone 12, it has a LiDAR sensor on it, which is basically, that technology was developed by NASA back in the day to scan Mars. And now it's on your phone. And there are just a number of lots of apps, and then suddenly you're capturing 3D content, your students are, you can then share them with each other in this virtual space with hubs. And it's, it's not hard. That's, the great thing. It's free and it's relatively easy.
We did, so we offer VR is sort of incorporated into our upper level curriculum, so students choose to individually do VR projects, which has been fairly easy to support this fall. But last spring, it was pretty bad, right? Because we had the VR bootcamp course where students are learning, they know 3D at that point, but they don't really know very much about they know a little bit about coding, but not very much. But anyway, we had a dozen students in that class and only 6 VR headsets. So me and a couple other grad students started scouring for Oculus Quests. And we were able to locate another, 5 or 6 Oculus Quests, get those in just as the quarantine was really getting underway. We shipped those off to the students and then had them do, we met them with VR chat, and then we had them set up their final projects using Mozilla Hubs, which was it was great. I mean, it was obviously an adaptation that wasn't perfect by any means, but the students really rose to it. And the people instructing the class really rose to it as well. It was a pretty good experience.
Yeah, amazing. There was another kind of question that was relating to that, asking about how technology could potentially change education. And that's something that, I spend all my creative research on. So kind of looking at the benefits of how when you are, teaching someone in a space, in a classroom, but, people don't just learn in classrooms. We need different support based off of our cognitive, the way our brain processes. So, if someone has a learning disability or someone is, taking a class in a different language than their native language, or they're hard of hearing, or, there's a whole range of reasons why people may need a different kind of learning experience. These platforms provide a huge opportunity to engage the senses. So instead of just having a visual component to what's being, talked about in the class, you could partner that with an audio version. So, I've been designing and redesigning what closed captioning looks like in augmented reality for a student who could get their own personalized closed captioning experience in glasses, without everyone around them even needing to know that they're getting that extra support. So I feel like there are a lot of, as this technology gets better, right now holding up your phone in a class, you might get yelled at. But if you are able to, wear a pair of glasses like the View 6 Blade, which is what I've been using for that, it allows for a little bit more looks kind of like glasses, but yet you're getting this additional layer of information to support your education or just being a human interacting with other humans in any given space.
And not to be lost in all this, the reason to include XR in education is that the research shows again and again that when people are learning in a tactile way, that they understand things better. And I had a grad student a couple of years ago do a master's thesis on this, and he basically wanted to see if he could teach people Korean by interacting with objects in a VR system. And then when they'd pick it up, they'd see the Korean name in Korean, they'd hear it, they'd have to then go put it in a box that had the same name on it, right? So it's engaging all the senses. he compared that to something similar to Rosetta Stone. He saw a 60% increase in retention 1 month later of those words. So for any educators out there, and I think this also applies to journalists who, our goal at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, we need to engage people, but we also need them to understand and remember, right? That's kind of the shared goal. That these immersive sensory types of experiences, it's more than just a thing that's kind of fun and engaging. Like it really helps people learn much, much better. So I think we'll see a lot of developments in that space over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the research continues to come out about that, but all of it has been in favor of that. That kind of connects really nicely to this next question. Is there any data that you would recommend you cite when trying to convince others or skeptics of the impacts of immersive storytelling on how it motivates humans? Anybody want to?
Can you repeat that? I was trying to get the dinners thing out onto the chat.
Oh, yes. Thank you for responding to that one. Yeah, someone wanted to know what the name of the dinners project was. Thanks. Is there any data that you would recommend that someone could cite when trying to convince others, possibly, the skeptics, of the impact of immersive storytelling on how it motivates humans?
There have been some excellent studies by a research group at Stanford on just this. And I can't pull it out of my brain right now because I'm too aged, but I'm going to throw my email in the chat and feel free to email me and I'm happy to set you up with that resource. They're doing fantastic research on very specific impacts on VR in terms of encouraging empathy, right? And encouraging action. So they're doing really, really intriguing work. It's the Stanford XR research group, but I can't remember what their actual name is. But I'm gonna toss my email in the chat, and please feel free to reach out to me about it. I'm happy to correspond with you.
I think it's the same data, the same group. I think this. I'm not remembering the exact specific statistic, but it's basically very interesting because a lot of like nonprofits, human rights organizations have, we're at the forefront of like commissioning VR content and especially like of documenting their work and continue to do so because in addition, they have now also found, and this data I think supports it, that when people are much more likely to donate money or get involved with the organization after they've seen a VR experience about some of their work.
Which is relieving to see that some of this stuff being backed up by social scientists actually studying it, right? Because these are all things that we've convinced ourselves of over many years. So it's good to be right sometimes.
All right, we're closing in on time here, so we're going to go to a lightning round speed to make sure we get some of these. I appreciate some of you answering questions in chat, and you can respond also in the Q&A if you feel. There's one up here, which is, how much should an aspiring VR or AR developers in video or journalism learn about Unity or C#? So basically, how much coding, I'm presuming the question is really, how much coding do we need to know to be doing this?
It depends on how much interactivity you want. Right?
Yeah, I get that question every time my VR class starts. In fact, I had an email about that today since our classes start next week. And the answer is you can get started now with these gaming engines and some of these online tools with no coding. And you could get through the entire, you could create a final project without touching a single line of code. But if you want to create more custom stuff, you do end up needing to at least mess with existing code, so other people's code. So some understanding of code and not being afraid to open up the hood and poke around is helpful, but it's not like a prerequisite. It's what I found.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say the thing which is if there's something that you're really good at and you can do that really, really well, and somebody else who can develop and program really, really well,
yes,
that you should become really good friends with them. Because if you try, if you could, like, I can code, right? But I'm a much better designer and I can spend hours and hours and hours. So it would take me about 3 hours, a person who's just programming and that's their only space that their head is in, they could probably do that in 10 minutes, right? So you have to just kind of look at what is your resources and what's the best use of your time. And, personally, I think that you can really put like the team building. You know, a lot of these projects people showed, they're not individual projects, they're team, and I think there's definitely a value in that. You know, depending on what it is, you could do stuff independently. And I personally, coming from the design side of everything, if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, you could check out Adobe Aero, which is a really fast way to just get a quick demo of augmented reality. And it's like design first, and you don't have to get logged down by the coding and how it works. All right.
I can vouch for the Teams thing. You know,
Yeah.
I worked by myself for a long time, and it's just so much faster if you can get people involved. And it doesn't necessarily have to be people that you pay, right? People that are in your orbit may already have different skill sets than you have and be able to add something. But it's certainly true that you can get started without a whole lot of coding or any coding, right? It's just when you want to get into interactivity, when you want it to get a little bit more advanced, then you have to get there. I would recommend Unreal Engine over Unity at this point. The graphics engine the lighting is so much better. Unity has a little bit more support direct from Unity, but Unreal Engine has a fantastic online support system made mostly of users, and their licensing is incredible, right? So if you only pay licensing fees once you make a certain amount of money, and I think it's up to $1.5 million right now. So your gross revenue, once it gets up to $1.5 million, then you have to start kicking back to Epic. But before that point, it's free to use. Which is very merciful.
I just put a number of links into the chat. So I mean, if you don't want to mess around with gaming engines, because sometimes they can blow up your computer if it's not very good, just a challenge too. These web-based solutions I find are just a really easy way to get your feet wet. And there are also communities where you can join like a Slack or something and then kind of learn with people and ask questions. So.
Yeah. Slack is actually there's so many communities that you can lean on Slack. There's one just for augmented reality developers, and just if you need a developer, it's a great place to go and connect as well. There's a question about any tips on finding funding for immersive productions.
There's a number of specific sort of small funds. They're mostly in Europe, small grants of 1,000, 2,000 euros, but they're available to American citizens if you're an American citizen. If you email me, I'd be happy to send you some links. I don't have any at my fingertips right now, but there's quite a few groups where you can pull down small bits of funding to get a project started.
Perfect. We have a question if people can connect with us on LinkedIn. Yeah. Everybody okay with that? Awesome.
Sure.
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. I think people have mentioned that, and absolutely, we're all happy to give you more. As I know, an hour and a half is a hard time to get all of the, because we're very passionate about what we were talking about in there. So
people working in XR generally are in very much of a sharing mode right now too. So I would never even be shy about reaching out to anybody. If they find that you're someone who wants to create along with them, it's a great time, right? It'll be proprietary later, but right now everyone is learning from each other.
And for everybody who's practicing in this field, the amount that any individual doesn't know greatly exceeds what any individual knows.
There are no experts.
So we all tend to be pretty generous, right? Because we'll be asking you in a couple of years.
Exactly.
Heath, the question was, what program are you using to edit your audio?
That's a really good question. So there's the tool thing is a little hard to work with right now. I'm currently building out a workflow for this project. I'm working to some degree, I'm working with Apple Logic Pro. I'm working with Pro Tools, and I'm testing this really funky bunch of plugins by a Korean startup that works just with Pro Tools, but they're very, very promising. And then Dear VR has some really cool stuff that works directly in Unity if you're working with Unity. And so it's a bit of a shifting landscape right now, but I'm finding that I'm building out a pretty decent workflow by kind of starting with Logic Pro and then moving everything over to Pro Tools at a certain point in the production. But if you have access to either Logic or Pro Tools, you can kind of get started. The new version of Logic has good binaural mixing, which is better than Pro Tools binaural mixing, but then Pro Tools has plugins for processing the ambisonic data that don't work in Logic. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth right now.
Ambisonic audio is a great topic for finding an expert. Join your team is what I found. I mean, the rabbit hole is so deep with that.
So
And yeah, so I might be asking you for some help later, Keith.
absolutely, anytime.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So within our last, 30 seconds, any last words, pieces of tips for people who are getting started or resources, any last parting words before we call it a day? Veda, you want to start us off?
Try and watch some stuff, even if it's, VR, AR stuff, that media organizations are doing. If you have a headset, explore some stuff, because if you see how they're building the storytelling, you'll get a sense of how to build your own.
I'd say perfect is the enemy of the good. Just get in and try stuff, and that's how you'll get better. And then ask for help in these Slacks and places like that.
Absolutely. Heath, any last words?
No.
No. Perfect. I guess my last thing would be, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up, and this was a real joyful conversation.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
to our
thank you, everybody.
panelists. We appreciate you being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Sundance, and I hope you have a great week and stay healthy.
Thanks for moderating, Renee.
Yes, happy to be here. Feel free to reach out to all of us, because I know you have many more great questions. All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right.